Welcome to our tips and tricks checklist for GNPI video. This tutorial will feature some of the best practices for great video that will help us tell the story of the great work that everyone is doing at GNPI around the world. Some of this will be very basic for some of you, but it is important that we all practice the fundamentals of video well so that we will have a consistent quality of work. Even though this may be a review of what you are already doing well, I hope that there will be some tips here that are new for you too. Thanks for watching, and thanks for your work. If English is harder to understand, please go into the YouTube settings and select Auto Generate English and then Auto Translate to your language to help understand all that is being spoken. You can also change the playback speed and slow it down or speed it up. If any of the terms used here are unfamiliar to you or you want more information on any subject, Google and YouTube are your best friends. I also can help answer any questions you have at any time during the work week. Feel free to reach out to me at greg.fish@gnpi.org. Throughout this lesson, I will also link to some of the best tutorials I have found on various subjects. Now let's begin our video checklist. Before shooting, be sure you are on the highest quality in your camera in terms of resolution, whether that is HD 1080 or 2.7K or 4K. Perhaps your timeline is 1080 and you wonder, why would you want to shoot in 4K? We can scale it down to fit 1080 or have greater flexibility and reframe or get two different shots out of one if we shoot at a higher resolution. It is best never to scale up if it can be avoided, but it is always okay to scale down. We do not want to shoot SD or 720 if our output file is going to be 1080, for example, because scaling up is never recommended unless it's urgent to do so. Next, determine which frame rate you will be filming in and what your timeline's edit frame rate will be. For me, I like 24 frames per second timelines. So I will shoot in 24, unless I want smooth slow motion. For slow motion B-roll, I will shoot in 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second and later convert it to 24 frames per second in the timeline. The shutter speed needs to be twice the frame rate. So if shooting 24 frames per second, the shutter must be 1/50th for natural motion blur. If 60 frames per second, then 1/120th. If 120 frames per second, then 1/250th. If shooting 30 frames per second, then twice that would be 1/60th. Those operating in PAL at 25 frames per second would also use 1/50th. In the famous exposure triangle, photographers push and pull between shutter speed, aperture, and ISO to achieve the right exposure for the shot. For video, our shutter is already set at twice the frame rate for natural motion, so we only have aperture and ISO to work out. Unless your camera is really good in low light, high ISO settings will produce digital noise and artifacts into the image that are undesirable. This is why lighting is important. If you have a fast lens that can open the aperture wide to 1.4 or 2.8, something low like this, you can keep the ISO down in low light. Open aperture lets in a lot of light and makes for a shallow depth of field, which is good for blurring the background, which is a nice effect. Just be careful to keep your subject in focus, because they could very easily become soft or out of focus. We can sharpen the image a little in post-production, but a great rule for everything is that it is always good to shoot the best possible image in the camera. A more closed aperture like f11 or higher, for example, will let in less light, and it is the opposite of a shallow depth of field. Much will be in focus, both the subject and its surroundings and background. This is better for outdoors, but if you want to achieve the shallow depth of field outside, you will likely need ND filters. ND stands for neutral density. Your camera may have them built in. They're good for stopping down the light that is coming in, like sunglasses for the lens. If they are not built in, you could attach some to your lens. A variable ND fader can allow you to manually set the exact spot that will properly expose your image, along with the other settings in your camera. Here's an excellent short tutorial on tips for shooting outdoors. A very common mistake all shooters make is to underexpose or overexpose in camera. This creates problems to correct in post-production, so it is best to get it right as you shoot. Some cameras have a histogram setting or waveform to check your exposure before hitting record. If you have a zebra setting on your camera, that may also prove very helpful. Zebras are little flashing lines that show what is overexposed or blown out. That information cannot be recovered through post-production. We will try to correct some footage that I shot poorly to demonstrate this in a separate tutorial. But for now, let's continue down the checklist of things to be aware of when shooting video. White balance is also an important setting to determine before pressing record. You may think that your camera can just stay on auto white balance and do a fine job. However, just as sunlight outside may change our exposure, our environment may change. If the camera is moving, or even if it is stationary, the auto settings of white balance can shift and create problems in post. Ask yourself these questions. If using lights, what color temperature are they? Does it match the settings in your camera? Do the skin tones look natural? We can add effects later for a certain look that you might be going for, but again, we want to shoot properly. We want to avoid harsh color casts, usually blue or yellow. This is extremely important when you have multiple cameras. We need those to be as close to a match as possible. And setting the white balance on the same color temperature, measured in a K number or Kelvin, is the best way to accomplish this. Many cameras allow you to set a custom white balance with a whiteboard or a gray card photo, but to ensure that it is the same on 2 or more cameras, I suggest setting the K number to what is correct, given your particular lighting. If your camera does not have the ability to set the K value, you could use a built-in setting, like daylight if you are outside, for example, or shade if you are in the shade. I will show some examples of incorrect white balance and how to correct them in post in a separate tutorial. Focus is so very important. Some tips to achieve great focus would be to magnify the image first. Use a viewfinder if you have one, or a larger monitor. Make sure the eyes are in focus. Focus assist, or peaking, will turn what is in focus to a certain color and is very helpful. Some newer cameras have great autofocus settings as well that can track faces, but need to be monitored constantly. So now our white balance is set, our exposure is correct, not under or overexposed, our ISO is not too high, our subject is in focus. Are we finally ready to hit record? Not quite, sorry. There are a few more items to consider. Picture profile is up next. Different cameras have different ways of handling colors and saturation and sharpness, etc. For multiple cameras, again, we want to try to match those profiles. Many like to shoot with a flat look. Just Google DSLR flat settings. This allows for more flexibility for post-production to color grade without losing too much quality. The more dynamic range you have, the more you can push your grade later to retrieve information from the shadows or the highlights or the midtones. Typically, saturation and sharpness and contrast is toned down in these profiles, similar to shooting in log. We can add saturation and sharpness and contrast back in post-production. Audio is almost more important than video quality in my opinion, especially today, where more of a raw video look is acceptable and even desired at times. Poor audio quality is not forgiven as much. Poor audio that is noisy and unintelligible will make footage unusable in many cases, unless it is B-roll and audio is not needed. Ask these questions. How are you capturing audio? The on-camera mic is not very good, especially from any distance. An external shotgun mic plugged into the camera is better. Make sure the settings are not too low or too high. Always monitor your audio and check your levels. Boom mics are great when they remain close to the subjects but out of the shot. In interview settings, a lavalier mic or lav mic is wonderful. Watch videos on tips for hiding these if that is important to you. Definitely run the wires under a shirt so we don't see the wires, as this can be distracting. Location can also come into play. Are you right by a noisy street with loud car horns? Maybe a new location that is more quiet would be good for this interview or dramatic scene. Stabilization is also very important. Run and gun style and handheld may be popular these days, but it still has to be done well to be usable. Shaky video is not natural but unavoidable without great in-camera stabilization, like in the new GoPro, or gimbals, like the DJI Ronin. Use of these is ideal, but whatever we can do to stabilize the shot is worth thinking about. A tripod will guarantee stability, but is sometimes considered boring these days. A monopod offers stability with more possibility for organic moves that cannot be achieved through tripod pans or tilts. If no tripod or monopod is available, I like to use the strap around my neck and pull the camera out with both hands until there's tension on the strap. These additional points of contact will provide some stability. Camera movement is good, but needs to be motivated, like most decisions, by the story. What type of movement is needed to complement the style and yet is not distracting? A general rule, not just for camera movement, is subtlety. If we can move the camera in subtle ways that will help the story without being distracting, then movement is preferred. The smallest of movements can add life to B-roll, for example. A smooth slider shot, especially if there's something blurred in the foreground, is a great way to improve production value. Again, use these tools sparingly. It is easy to ruin a good thing by overusing it. Here's a great tutorial on camera movement. Composition and framing is also very vital to having good shots. Rather than trying to explain everything to consider, I would rather you take some time to watch this short tutorial and take notes on the following items to consider before shooting. Depth, three-dimensional versus flat. Size, within the frame. Contrast, not just color. Shot types, wide to close. Balance, framing guides, rule of thirds, headroom, level horizons, looking room. Distance, and height. Lighting is another important aspect that does not always mean equipment is needed. Sometimes available light and bouncing off of reflectors, or even cutting or flagging light is what is needed. Understanding how to shape light for your needs is crucial. There are many tutorials on this subject. I won't list any here, but if you want to learn more about different kinds of lighting setups, just search Google or YouTube for 3-point lighting or interview lighting tips, or any number of other keywords, and learn some new approaches and practice them. That is the pre-shoot checklist to always have in the back of your mind. I will show some of my favorite features and some tips and tricks that I have found to be very helpful, but this will be in a separate video. Now let's bring this video to an end. At GNPI USA, we love to take what you send us and repackage it for our audience to inform them about what you are doing. What types of footage do we need at GNPI USA? I'm glad you asked. human interest, food, smiles, culture, religion, emotional. Clips that show direct GNPI impact, behind the scenes, baptisms, scenery, sunsets, sunrise, time-lapse, drone shots, smooth slow motion. Always think in terms of the story. How can we best tell this story? And do you have good video clips to support what is happening? Good 5 to 10 second shots from all vantage points. A wide establishing shot that sets the scene. Who are the characters? Medium shots of them, close-ups, extreme close-ups showing emotion or action. The shots and the style of Peter McKinnon in his film The Bull is one that resonates with Western audiences. Watch it here. He is careful to get full coverage of an area and interesting footage that is visually stunning. Our goal is to craft stories that will connect at the heart level with our donors and attract new people to come on board and partner with GNPI. You all do amazing work, and we want to tell others about the good work you are doing. The stories and presentation of those stories in a relatable way will give people a face, someone to connect with, not just an idea to comprehend. It is vital that we communicate in the most effective possible way. Thanks for spending time to watch this series. I look forward to seeing what you will send us. We'll see you on the next video.